In 1974, a 28-page pamphlet nearly brought down the world's largest food company. It wasn't written by a senator or a scientist or a rival corporation. It was written by a single journalist named Mike Muller, working for a small UK charity. The title was simple: 4 words: The Baby Killer. And the company it targeted didn't respond by changing its behavior. It responded by hiring lawyers. That decision to sue rather than reform tells you almost everything you need to know about Nestle. This is a company with over $94 billion in annual revenue. It operates in 186 countries. It owns more than 2,000 brands. You have almost certainly eaten something Nestle made today: a Kit Kat, a Nespresso pod, Gerber baby food, Purina pet food. It is woven into the fabric of daily life in a way almost no other company on earth can match. And for more than half a century, it has been accused of some of the most serious corporate crimes imaginable. Not once, not twice. Across decades, continents, and product lines, in patterns so consistent they stop looking like mistakes and start looking like strategy. So let's go back to the beginning. Henri Nestle was a Swiss pharmacist. In 1867, working out of Vevey, Switzerland, he developed something called farine lactée milk flour, one of the world's first commercial infant foods. His original purpose was genuinely noble: to save premature infants who couldn't breastfeed. The company that bore his name was built on that founding idea: feed the vulnerable, save lives. It is one of the great historical ironies that a century later, that same company would be accused of doing the precise opposite. By the mid-20th century, Nestle and its competitors had begun expanding infant formula sales into the developing world: Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The marketing was sophisticated and relentless. The formula was presented as scientific, modern, and superior, something a good mother would choose. And in 1956, Nestle deployed one of the most cynical marketing tactics in corporate history. They hired women and dressed them in white nurse uniforms. In Nigeria, Ghana, and Sierra Leone countries where millions of people had never interacted with a trained medical professional, these women walked into hospitals and maternity wards, handed out free samples, and told new mothers to stop breastfeeding. They were called Nestle Girls. They were paid on commission. Here is the problem. The problem that everyone at Nestle's headquarters in Vevey had to know, because it wasn't complicated. The formula requires clean water to prepare. In these communities, clean water was scarce or non-existent. The formula requires literacy to follow the instructions. Literacy rates in target populations were low. The formula requires a continuous, reliable supply of money to maintain. These were the world's poorest families. So what happened was this: mothers received free samples long enough for their breast milk to dry up. Then the samples stopped. They couldn't afford to keep buying formula. They couldn't go back to breastfeeding. So they diluted the formula, stretched it further, mixed it with contaminated water from rivers and wells, and their babies starved, or died of diarrhea, or both. When Mike Muller's pamphlet landed in 1974, the evidence was already overwhelming. German activists translated it under the title "Nestle tötet Babys," Nestle kills babies. And Nestle's response was to drag those activists into a Swiss criminal court for defamation. The trial began in 1976, and here is where the story gets remarkable. Judge Hans Egg ruled technically in Nestle's favor. The activists were fined 300 Swiss francs each, about $150. But the judge's written opinion became historic. He stated plainly that Nestle must fundamentally reform its marketing practices, or it would bear moral responsibility for infant deaths. He wrote that the needs of the developing world do not permit the advertising of products which serve as a substitute for breastfeeding. Nestle won in the courtroom. It was destroyed everywhere else. On July 4, 1977, an organization called In Fact launched a consumer boycott of Nestle products in the United States. Within a few years, it had spread to dozens of countries, supported by hundreds of organizations, churches, universities, labor unions. In 1978, Senator Edward Kennedy chaired Senate hearings on the crisis. He said directly, "The formula companies are using the most aggressive marketing techniques to convince mothers in developing countries that their product is superior to breast milk. The result is malnutrition and death." How many deaths? UNICEF estimated in the 1990s that 1.5 million infants died annually due to lack of breastfeeding globally, a figure partly attributed to formula marketing. A 1981 study in The Lancet found that in developing countries, formula-fed babies were 5 to 10 times more likely to die than breastfed babies in the first 6 months of life. Dr. Derek Jelliff, who coined the term commerciogenic malnutrition, estimated in the early 1970s that formula marketing was contributing to tens of thousands of infant deaths per year in Africa alone. In 1981, the World Health Organization and UNICEF adopted the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes. 118 nations voted in favor. One voted against. That nation was the United States under the Reagan administration, in a decision widely attributed to corporate lobbying. In fact, suspended the boycott in 1984 after Nestle promised to comply. By 1988, the boycott was reinstated because Nestle had resumed the violations-free samples in hospitals in Poland, South Africa, Thailand. Formula promoted as equivalent to breast milk in Pakistan. Healthcare workers paid to push formula in Bangladesh. As of 2023, a UK organization called First Steps Nutrition Trust published evidence that Nestle was still marketing formula in Southeast Asia and Africa with claims of brain development benefits, claims not approved in Europe or the United States. The boycott has never fully ended. It has been running in some form for nearly 50 years, but the baby formula scandal is only one part of this story. In 2005, Nestlé Waters CEO Peter Brabeck-Letmathe sat down for a documentary interview and said something that would follow his company for the rest of its existence. He described the idea that water is a human right as, in his word, extreme. He said water was a foodstuff like any other and should have a market value. The video circulated online millions of times. Nestlé claimed he'd been misrepresented. The video was unedited. What Nestlé was actually doing with water made the interview feel less like a gaffe and more like a mission statement. In Michigan, Nestlé had been pumping water from wells near Mecosta County since 2001, bottling it as Ice Mountain. By 2016, they were extracting 3.4 million gallons of Michigan groundwater per day, paying the state approximately $200 per year in permit fees. That same year, in the same state, over 100,000 residents of Flint were drinking water contaminated with lead because the city couldn't afford proper infrastructure. In January 2018, the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality approved Nestlé's request to increase pumping to 400 gallons per minute. The public comment period had received 80,945 comments opposing the increase, 75 in support. In California, Nestlé operated a water bottling plant in San Bernardino National Forest, drawing from Strawberry Creek near Arrowhead Springs. The permit authorizing this extraction had expired in 1988. Nestlé had been pumping without a valid permit for approximately 27 years. When California declared a state of emergency drought in 2015 and Governor Jerry Brown ordered mandatory water restrictions on residents and businesses, Nestlé kept pumping. A subsequent investigation found that Nestlé had been claiming rights to 25.5 million gallons per year. Their legitimate rights were to approximately 2.3 million. In 2016, the town of Centre Wellington in Ontario tried to buy a well to secure its growing population's water supply. They offered $300,000. Nestlé paid $1.5 million, 5 times the town's offer, to outbid a municipality for its own water. Pakistan is classified by the UN as a water-scarce country. Per capita water availability has fallen from 5,000 cubic meters in 1951 to under 1,000, the threshold for scarcity. Nestlé operates its Pure Life brand there extensively. It has never disclosed specific extraction volumes from Pakistani aquifers. Here is what all of this adds up to. This is not a story about a company that made mistakes. Mistakes are isolated. Mistakes are followed by correction. What Nestlé's history describes is something different, a coherent, repeating pattern of targeting the most vulnerable populations in the world in their most desperate moments, with products or practices that extract maximum value while externalizing the cost. The cost being paid in infant deaths, in poisoned wells, in communities outbid for their own water. The company sold its North American water brands in 2021 for $4.3 billion. It closed the California facility. It moved on. The communities it left behind did not have that option. There is a question worth sitting with at the end of all this. Nestlé didn't do any of this in secret. The baby formula crisis was front-page news for a decade. The water permits were public record. The violations were documented, published, broadcast. And the company continued selling, continued growing, continued acquiring. Which means the real question isn't what Nestlé did. It's what the systems surrounding Nestlé allowed, what regulators permitted, what governments enabled, what consumers, including all of us watching this, have quietly funded one purchase at a time. Henri Nestle invented his product to save the vulnerable. Somewhere between 1867 and now, something went very wrong.